All right, so we finished the chapter. So let us look at the end of chapter question. So we have a number of requirements. So let's read through the question. All right, an audit in early part of its development was an assurance service that involved checking all records under consideration of accuracy and confirmation that fraud has or has not taken place during the period under consideration. So basically that was it about audit, right? We saw that it was basically checking and verification exercise. Aim is to identify error and fraud. You can see accuracy and fraud. That's basically the early edges, right? A modern audit has shifted the emphasis from fraud detection to ascertainment whether financial statements show true and fair view or not. So basically, now it has shifted from fraud detection to stating whether the financial statement show true and fair view. A number of approaches have also merged with time, including gathering audit evidence on sampling basis, reliance of internal controls, external confirmation, and use of cards, among others. So along the way, techniques like sampling, cards, reliance of internal controls have emerged, right? We have actually looked at all this as we were actually looking at the development and the origin of audit, right? So at the beginning, it was basically fraud plus error. Now it is moved there to true and fair. So basically, that's basically the shift of the audit from 350 BCs to now. All right, now let's look at the requirement. The first is saying state the legislation that marked a major shift of an audit into the state it is now today, and mention the main principles the legislation introduced. So we should talk about the main principles and talk about legislation that has actually contributed to the major shift of audit as it is today, right? That's the first one. The second one, outline and explain 4 factors that led to the change of audits. Focus from fraud detection as to ascertaining of the truth and fairness of financial statement and subsequent merge of different approach mentioned above. So we should talk about factors that made audit to shift from detection of fraud to true and fair view, and also talk about what made the images of different approaches talked about there. We talked about cuts, we talked about sampling, we talked about reliance of internal control. What factors actually led to all these? And they're saying state in your own opinion whether fraud is no longer an issue of concern to a company and how it is dealt with in modern audit. So basically, we should talk about that. And lastly, what do you understand by the term true and fair view? So let's start off by looking at the first requirement. State the legislation that marked a major shift of auditing to the state it is known today, and mention the main principles the legislation introduced. So if you can remember, right, the time frame or timeline number 3 that we looked at, which was basically from 1920, right? Remember, 1920 to 1960, we saw that when the audit shifted towards United States economy, right, we saw that there was enactment of some laws, right? The first law that we actually talked about was in the USA. There was an enactment of the Security, right? Security and Exchange Commission Act. Exchange Commission Act. All right, that's basically 1934. And the second law was in the UK, and that is the Companies Act. 1948. All these two acts are the ones that actually contributed to the major change of audit as it is known today. And the principles, right? The principles mentioned here, the first one was auditor should be independent. Auditor should be independent. He should not have any influence, be influenced by the company, right? Auditor should be independent. That's the first one. There should be audits there, or they should audit profit or loss and balance sheet. Audit requirements of P&L or statement of profit or loss, P or L, and balance sheet. In other words, what you're saying is the balance sheet and the profit or loss should be audited, right? That there was a requirement for the balance sheet and the profit or loss to be audited. And an auditor should be a qualified accountant. Auditor should be a qualified accountant. Not any Jim and Jack can be an auditor. Like we saw prior to 1920, we saw that they were just choosing a what? One of the shareholders to be. So it might be possible that they were not qualified accountant. Auditor should be a qualified accountant. Right? Another principle that also was mentioned there was that the law set up the duties, and responsibility of the auditors. Responsibility of the auditors. That means the law actually set up what were the duties and the responsibility of the auditors. Right? So basically, we can mention at least 4, right? And that maybe that should earn you marks for this one, right? So we have talked about the 2 acts, the Security and Exchange Commission Act and the UK Companies Act, and the principles: audit should be independent, audit requirement for profit or loss and balance sheet, auditor should be qualified accountant, and it also set up the duties and responsibility of the auditors. So these are the 2 laws that actually contributed to the major shift of audit as it is known today. So basically, we have answered that part of the question. The second one said outline and explain. Outline and explain 4 factors that led to the change of audit focus from fraud detection, right, to ascertainment of the truth and fairness of financial statement, and subsequent images of different approaches mentioned above. So we talked about the techniques mentioned about sampling, right, cuts, and so on. So the first one, right, was the fact that companies sourced funds or finance, right, finance from a wide range of investors because of the capital intensiveness of the business. So, because they were supposed to have a lot of money to invest in machinery because of the Industrial Revolution, it meant that they were supposed to collect money from more individuals. So, because of that, they were supposed to what? To make sure that the financial statements show true and fair view rather than fraud. We saw that in timeline number 2. Another thing was that another factor was the enactment of the acts mentioned above, right? Enactment of the laws mentioned above. The two laws that we've mentioned above were the ones that actually required the financial statement to show true and fair view. Because of those acts, now it shifted from fraud detection to ascertainment of whether financial statements show true and fair view. That's the second fact. Another thing was the size, right? The size, let me just say the growth in size, the growth in size of companies meant that auditors cannot check everything. Hence, sampling. The technique of sampling came because of the vast majority of transactions that were actually happening, right? Because of the growth in size of companies. So they could not check everything. Another point could be that advancement of technology, right? Tech meant that companies used computerized systems, right? Computerized systems forcing auditors to develop cuts. Because our clients were now using computerized system, it forced the auditors to start using cuts. Cuts, I said, they are computerized. Is it computerized what? Let's just check them out. They are basically, just forgot, it's computerized audit techniques, right? Computerized assisted audit techniques, right? So, because our clients are using computers in their accounting system, it forced the auditors to use cuts. So, I think we've actually answered the question properly. Now, looking at the other question, state in your opinion, basically it's an opinion, right? State in your opinion whether fraud is no longer an issue of concern to a company and how it is dealt with in the modern audit. So, the question is, in your opinion, do you think that audit is no longer an issue of concern? My opinion, I feel that fraud is still an issue. So, I would say that fraud is still an issue if it is material. Material, it means if it is big, it actually affects the financial statements, right? If somebody steals a 10 water, it's not really a concern. But if somebody steals millions or billions, right, then that's what? It's very a concern. We can talk about it is a concern, right? As evidence by the corporate scandals. the recent corporate scandals. Recent corporate scandals. We talked about that recently there were corporate scandals, right? Corporate scandals, e.g., the Enron, the fall of the Enron, a very big company in the USA. Overnight, it fell. It was just basically because of fraud, right? It is still an issue because we have actually recently experienced corporate scandals, right? It's corporate scandals uh, that actually have caused the downfall of major companies, right? And how is the modern audit dealing with this? We have talked about our opinion is still an issue. We have talked about it's still an issue when it is material. Two, this has been evidenced by the recent corporate scandals, e.g. Enron, right? What is basically now the how is it the modern audit dealing with it? Before we talk about how the auditors are dealing with this one, we should appreciate, right? We will actually talk about this when we start to look at the actual audits, but you should appreciate that the responsibility, abilities of fraud, right? That's prevention and detection. Prevention and detection, it is lies with management. So it's not the role of the auditor to prevent and detect fraud. No, 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 no. His role is not that. We saw that an auditor's main objective is to express if the financial statement show a true and fair view. So this one is not his main problem. It's not his responsibility as an auditor. But right, but the auditor has to put procedures, right, that can detect material fraud and should be spectacle. In other words, so what we're saying is the auditor has no responsibility on detecting and preventing fraud, right? But what he can do in the modern audit is to put in audit procedures that can be able to detect what material fraud. So that's how the the auditor is actually dealing with this fraud. What we are saying is, first, fraud is still an issue, right? Maga maga material, big fraud, right? Right? As evidenced by the recent corporate scandals, just as like Enron, right? But we should appreciate that the responsibility of fraud, right, lies with the management and not the auditor. But what the auditor responsibility is to what? To put procedures that can what? Detect material fraud. Audit procedures that can detect material fraud. So it's something that maybe we did not talk about in this chapter, but as we go, we will see this, the responsibility of auditors towards errors and fraud. What are the responsibilities? So as we go on with the chapters, we'll actually appreciate and now link this answer to whatever we're going to start to learn. You appreciate then this answer was a more vibrant answer. So let's look at the other part. What do you understand by the term true and fair view? So we know that true, right, means being factual. Being factual, being factual, and conforming or agreeing with the reality. Conforming with the reality. What is on the ground is what in the financial statements. That's basically conforming with reality or agreeing with the actual reality. That's truth or true. While fair means that it's unbiased. It's unbiased, right? And also reflects the commercial substance of the transactions. So, first, it is free from error. No, it's free from bias and also reflects the commercial substance of transactions. So that's what free, true, and fair view means. So at this juncture, that means we have actually come to the end of the chapter on the roles and the origin of audit. All right, thank you.